episode number 3 of the High and Trial podcast. On today's episode, we will go over some USCA regional results and interview Renaissance man Dave Kroyer. Let's go.
Live from America's heartland, this is the High and Trial podcast, your source for Schutzhund IPO and working dog news and interviews. Now, your host, he's all bark and no bite, Big John Wolf.
Welcome everybody to the High and Trial podcast. We have got a great episode for you today. We've got an interview with Schutzhund Renaissance man Dave Kroyer, and we'll go over the results of some United Schutzhund Club of America regionals. Before we get into that though, I would like to invite you guys to visit my website. That's www.highandtrial.com, where you can check out blog articles, video tutorials, past episodes of the podcast, and whatnot. You've got stuff on there for all levels of people, so get in there. It'll be a good resource for you. So now that winter has broken in many sections of the country, we're starting to see a pickup in the trial season. Since our last episode, we've had 2 regional competitions in the United Schutzhund Club of America. The first is the Southeast region. It was hosted by the North Beach Schutzhund Club on March 6th to the 8th. They are located there in Little River, South Carolina. The judges were Randall Hoadley in the tracking, and the obedience and the protection was done by Frank Phillips. In that trial, top 3 in third place, we had Richard Shook and Maggie. In second place, we had Thomas Lever and Jedi. And winning the competition was Chris Thompson, his dog Sid, with a 269. The other regional that took place since our last episode was the South Central Regional, February 20th through the 22nd in Hutto, Texas. It was hosted by 3 separate clubs, the Austin Schutzhund Club, the Lone Star Schutzhund Club, and the San Gabriel Hundeverein. It was judged by Elmar Mans. In that one, the top 3, we have Richard Atkins and Farrow. In second place, we have Rob Dunn and Tristan. And in first place, we have Dave Kroyer and Archer with a 294. They V'd all 3 phases. So congratulations to all those folks who were able to make the podium in those 2 regions. I think it's also important to congratulate anybody who showed their dog in the regional competitions. It's never easy showing your dog, and it takes a lot of balls to get out there. So anybody who got out there, showed their dog, has my respect, and congrats, guys. So without any further ado, let's get into today's interview. Today on the podcast, I got Mr. Dave Kroyer. I wanted to get Dave on the podcast because he's a real Renaissance man in the truest sense of the word. He has been able to be successful in multiple venues. In Schutzhund, he is a multiple-time WUSV participant. He has competed in Mondio Ring on the world level. He has competed in high levels in agility, and he's also very adept at nose work. So just a true all-around dog trainer. I wanted to get his perspective on both Schutzhund and the other sports and how those they can interrelate with one another. He's also kind of a Renaissance man in outside of dog training. Dave has been a professional musician, and all the intro and outro music today will be from groups that Dave has participated in. So, let's get into it.
Good and gone, heading where the warm winds blow. Good and gone, heading where the warm winds blow.
Welcome everybody to the High and Trial podcast. Today on the podcast we got Dave Kroyer. How's it going, man?
I'm doing great, man. How you doing?
Oh, I'm not doing too bad. The question everybody wants to know, man, is what is it like to be a Packers fan living in the middle of Texas?
Yeah, man, that's a pretty good question. You know, interesting enough, man, the football fans in Texas are really receptive to me being here, probably for a number of reasons. For one, neither the Cowboys or the Houston Texans are in the infamous black and blue division, so I don't walk around, you know, waiting to get beat up half the time. Second of all, I was lucky enough and fortunate enough to find a little Packer bar in downtown Austin, which, it has a ton of cheeseheads there from Wisconsin. So they're real welcoming to me coming and watching the games. It's a really good time. So, I've got no problem being a Packer fan here in Texas.
Wow, man. Yeah, I'm from the Indy area, and I can't imagine that a bar would have a group of Patriots fans. So it must be.
I've traveled all around the world, and I'll say this. There's probably a Packer bar in every major city if you dig deep enough. I'll probably get killed for saying this. Everybody calls Dallas America's team. I really think Green Bay is America's team, but we'll end right there so I don't get shot walking down the road tomorrow.
Yeah, I don't want to get in too much trouble. So first of all, congratulations, man, on your regional win. V'd in all three phases. Congratulations on that. It's quite the accomplishment.
Thanks, man. Really feeling like we finally got this boy kind of dialed in. It's been a little bit of a tough year for me, but we're feeling good for 2015, and we are heading to Buffalo in about 2 months from now.
Cool, man. Yeah, actually quite jealous because we just now were able to this past weekend was the first kind of break in the weather for us, so to see you guys being able to trial down there was I was pretty jealous.
Yeah, it's funny because all my friends in the north, and I kind of poke fun at them during the winter and put pictures of me tracking on beautiful green winter wheat midwinter and training and stuff, but comes the summer, it's not really fun down here. We deal with sometimes 40, 50 days of 100-plus heat and no rain, and, it's a little bit of a challenge training down here, especially being at a higher level. And I can remember a number of years trying to prepare for a world championship, which are traditionally held in September, October, and trying to track and train my dog when it was 100 degrees out, still at 9 p.m. at night.
Man, yeah. I've flown kind of in and out of Dallas there, and I mean, just looking down, there's not a ton of green grass, so it's got to be kind of challenging to find some tracking fields in general, like anywhere down there. Yeah,
as far as the tracking goes, primarily we track on dirt down here for club trials and stuff like that, but if you're going to go further than a club trial, you've got to find grass. And I've got a couple little secret spots that I track on for grass that are held very close to me, and I don't let too many people know about. We're talking about maybe 20 acres max that I've just beat to death over the last 10 years. Yeah. But we get it done. It's a little bit tricky also with the fire ants. Fire ants come out anytime the ground temperature is over 72 degrees. Ugh. Well, I mean, that's 7, 8, 9 months of the year, so it's a little bit tricky. And training becomes a real cycle thing here in Texas, and you kind of got to figure out the tracking, but you can get it done.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, honestly, I would rather be here than dealing with what you guys have to deal with the winters up there, because I can still at least train during the summer, even if it's under the lights on my field at midnight and 5 a.m. tracking or whatever. But it's difficult.
Yeah. I couldn't imagine. I've heard stories of fire ants. I've heard stories of rattlesnakes. Man, I'm kind of the same way as you. As I can appreciate what you like, but as soon as I saw a rattlesnake, man, I'd be out. So give me the snow anytime.
Yeah, that's another interesting thing. The rattlesnakes. Normally they go dormant during the winter, and I remember coming home from the Nationals, which was the early November, and normally the snakes are all dormant by then. We were still running into rattlesnakes and running them over on the road across to my tracking field in November and December, and one of my trainers found one here on my property mid-December, and last week we found a 5-footer just right down the road from my tracking field. So they didn't go dormant this year, And today it got up to about 80 degrees, you know, and I'm sitting here looking at the grass and going, man, it is prime breeding for rattlesnakes. And we're about a month and a half early for that. So that's a little tricky and a little nerve-wracking, but you just have to have a good eye for that type of stuff when you're out there laying on track. But believe me, I've watched a number of tracks coming up on a snake and said, you know what, we'll do this another day.
Yeah, no kidding, man. Well, Dave, let's get in to how you got started in dog training. Tell me the story. When were you first exposed to Schutzhund, and how did you get involved in dog training in general?
Well, you know, I like a lot of people that are into the sport or the different sports. You know, I kind of grew up with dogs my whole life. Nothing formal. We always had dogs around my house. You know, some German Shepherds, a couple Schnauzers, all different types of breeds. And actually, I was a professional musician for about 13 to 15 years of my life.
Oh, wow.
And around 1997, 98, I actually decided to get out of the music industry. And everybody even said, well, God, why would you ever do that? You know, and I can never give a real explanation, but I found in my life, after 15 years of something, I kind of get tired of it a little bit, and I move on. So I thought to myself, well, what else could I do? You know, I like dogs. Let me see if I can make a career somehow with dogs. I wasn't even really thinking Schutzhund or IPO. I'm just like, okay, I like dogs, and I had a couple as an adult while I was still a musician. So I was living in St. Louis, and I ended up going to the Tom Rose School, which some of the listeners may know about, but it's a dog training school in south of St. Louis. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I kind of made the decision, and I was still actually in the music industry, and I was playing 5 to 6 nights a week and going to school at the Tom Rose School during the day, which was really, really tough. And
sounds brutal.
I'd be out till 2 a.m. working, and I'd get home and I'd run, you know, get an hour or two of sleep, and I'd run to school, and I'd get up and go tracking and do the whole day of school. And the end of the day, I'd run back home, eat dinner, train my dogs, and then go work again, playing at a, you know, a club somewhere in downtown St. Louis.
Wow.
And that went on for a couple months. It was kind of interesting because a lot of the students, they never saw me at the Tom Rose School training. They just said, who's this? And at that time, I had long dreadlocks. They're like, who's this crazy hippie dreadlock guy?
Yeah.
You know, we see him during the day, but we never see him at night. He must just be some weird hippie dude that's going to fall out. And then when we had our first test, I would just blow everybody out of the water. And they're like, wow, what's up with this guy? And it was really just a passion I had. I had no other option in my life. It was either flip hamburgers at Burger King or get into dog training. And I'm not a big meat guy, so I went for the dog training.
So you basically got in to dog training straight into Schutzhund, or?
I went to the Tom Rose School knowing that I was very interested in dogs and dog learning theory, canine learning theory, and dog training in general. Mm-hmm. Leaning towards working dog type of stuff. You know, I knew there was a sport out there called Schutzhund. I didn't know much about it. Mm-hmm. I had 2 German Shepherds that I got from the local Humane Society, you know, a white one and a black one that was on death row that I decided to take. Yeah. And I thought they would be, you know, the greatest police working dog in the world. Yeah. And at the Tom Rose School, I actually learned that, you know, there's a little bit more to it than just being a German Shepherd. So I was always leaning towards the working dog side of it. Mm-hmm. Not realizing that I could make a living doing that. Of course, you know, we're always thinking we're going to make a living doing pet training and that type of thing, yep. Which is really still a lot of the bread and butter here with my company. Mm-hmm. But it all started at the Tom Rose School.
Cool. Well, since you've been started in Schutzhund, you've had many accomplishments. You've been a member of multiple WUSV teams. How, in that time, have you seen the sport change, and how have you, as a trainer, been able to keep up with the changes? You
know, it's a really good question because I think that if we look at a lot of the competitors and in the past and the present, really, okay, I've been around for a while, but I'm still kind of on the young side. I consider me a newbie in it, even though I've been doing it since 2000. When I got into the sport, I didn't have a lot of bias about how you do this. I didn't have a lot of baggage that came with how to train a dog, how to do IPO, how to do police dogs. I went to the Tom Rose School, and then I immediately was hired to be a training director of a company down here in Texas that kind of gave me the opportunity to explore and spread my wings. So I had no preconceived notion of how to do this stuff.
Cool, man.
So I was really exposed to a lot of different type of training. Like as I talk about this, I didn't really study or mentor IPO trainers or Schutzhund trainers. I was always really into AKC obedience trainers, agility trainers. Matter of fact, I competed at a pretty high level in agility for quite a while.
Okay, I didn't know that.
So, yeah, I was exposed to all this type of different stuff, and the thing that caught my eye was really AKC obedience training at the top level, not at the middle level and the low level, at the top level.
Yep.
And there were some people in the beginning that really, if I think about it, the people who were my mentors at that time was an AKC woman named Terry Arnold, another woman named Anne-Marie Silverton, and those are the people that kind of, I would say, shaped my training for obedience as where it's at today. Of course, I was really into a lot of the IPO trainers. Also, T. Floyd was always interested in me a lot. He's a good friend of mine. I love T to death, and I've always really admired his work. Of course, Ivan Balabanov. And I hate to say those two names because there's a whole bunch of people that have influenced me.
Yeah.
As that would happen with anybody getting into something. But really, it was kind of a whole mixture of a whole bunch of different people coming from different disciplines. And really, Schutzhund was not my main focus. It was my main focus, but that's not where I derived ideas from.
No, that's fascinating. And that's kind of what fascinated me towards you and wanting to interview you is your success in multiple disciplines. I didn't even know about the agility. I knew about the Mondio ring, obviously. Can you speak specifically about what skills have you learned in those various sports that have helped you in Schutzhund?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with the agility, because a lot of people don't know that I was very involved in agility for a long time with a couple little cattle dogs that I had. So that had a definite influence on how I deal with all the jumping exercises, whether they're in ring or IPO. So in agility, we would all have to agree that jumping is probably at least 75% of the skill set in agility, right? So as anything that I do, I'm going to really dissect a discipline and try to figure out what's the best way for any type of dog and to get the most out of the dog. So I had a lot of experience and knowledge of jumping, which, I can really dissect jumping all day long. I could do a 5-day seminar just on jumping. And it was very interesting when I got into Schutzhund or ring. People always kind of looked at the jumps, the A-frame, the hurdle, the long jump, palisade in ring as secondary stuff. They always figured, well, a dog will just jump. And the reality is, if you take 5 dogs, maybe only 1 or 2 you get lucky and they jump properly, but the other 3 have no idea technique-wise.
No, I could definitely associate with that. I know with my last dog, I kind of treated it secondarily, and he clipped the jump every time, and it drove me nuts. So with this dog, I've actually kind of tried to go back and get the agility perspective. So that's awesome, man.
Yeah. Jumping gets really, really deep when you break it down. I personally have never had a dog with jumping issues, and I want to keep it that way. But that's kind of because I do isolate it, and if I have a new dog that I'm working, I don't assume he knows how to jump. Mm-hmm. I actually have to teach him how to jump properly with technique. So in the ring sports, man, the jump points are huge. You know, they're really big points. And when I got into ring sport with one of my dogs, you know, I thought he was a top-level competitor. All the old-timers in ring, they always asked me a few questions. One of the first questions they would say was, how does he jump? Does he jump maximum on the first time? And I said, well, yeah, he does. And if you really understand the sport, it's really important that the dog has a really good technique in jumping, because you don't want to waste their energy in the jumping phases. And then if we move over to IPO or Schutzhund, there's so many dogs that even on the hurdle take stutter steps going into the jump. Or how about this? We see it every third dog, dogs jumping off the top of the A-frame.
Yep.
Right? That's a big one, dogs jumping off the top of the A-frame. Well, in agility, we have to teach our dogs to hit contact points at the bottom of the A-frame. So that was just second nature for me. It's like, well, I know how to do that. That's a no-brainer. Mm-hmm. But it's funny because I still see people struggling with that, you know, every weekend when I'm doing seminars.
So that's kind of the agility side. Can you get into ring and kind of what you've learned from it?
Absolutely. So when I got into Schutzhund, I actually hated ring. And Mondial ring really didn't hit the United States yet. I think it hit around right when I got into dogs, about 99, 2000, but I didn't know about it yet. Mm-hmm. And then that's Mondial ring. French ring has been around for a while, and I actually hated French ring. Mm-hmm. and you know, I saw a couple big championships, and I always laughed and said, oh, that's just prey work. The decoys are running away from the decoys. There's no real pressure. We're not testing the dogs. Well, I had a dog named Dax from Meerhout Breeding Program, which are some friends of mine, Rob Dunn and Jesse Gabriel here in Austin. Mm-hmm. I have a great breeding program, and I had a dog from their breeding program that I took to 2 world championships for IPO. When he retired, I decided to investigate ring training. So I'm like, okay, you know, he's an older dog. I'm not going to start him over, but I'm going to try to get a brevet, and I'm going to really see what this is all about in French ring. Well, as I started to train, I was like, wow, this isn't really that easy. You know, it's interesting because you have like 2 groups of people that are in dog sport, the people that are either doing Schutzhund or the people that are doing ring, whether it's Mondial ring or French ring.
Yep.
And they're constantly talking shit back and forth. Which sport is better, right? Well, this one tests the dog harder. This one will test the dog harder. But there aren't many people that have done it at the level that I've done it at that can honestly speak about it.
Yep.
You know, there's 1 or 2 people in the United States, and that's about it. But I get amazed when I'm watching, you know, the Schutzhund people argue with the ring people of which is more difficult, which will test the dog. I'll tell you what. Train a dog at top level at both sports, and they're hard as hell in both sports.
Oh, yeah.
So I started to really respect the whole ring thing, and I started in French ring first. And I had gotten a couple Malinois, and I figured, you know, it's a sport based around a Malinois, even though a German Shepherd can do it and have done it at a top level. The sport's really based around a Malinois. It was designed for a Malinois. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to get me a Malinois. You know, I wouldn't get a cart pony to run the Kentucky Derby. I'm going to get the right dog for the right sport.
Yep.
And it wasn't so easy at first. I didn't get quite the right dog I was looking for. Then I ended up getting a dog actually from Joe Farm Kennels in Belgium. That was my dog Enoch von Joe Farm, who was, I think, 25-time French Ring 3, had been to 2 Mondial Ring World Championships, and I started to training him. And in the beginning, all the ring people were telling me, hey, you can't train him like an IPO dog. And I'm like, training is training, right? Mm-hmm. They got to bite, they got to out, they got to heel, they got to retrieve, they got to jump. Training is training. I'm not going to think like that.
Yep.
So a lot of times people were saying, "Oh, you're taking too much time developing the exercises. You know, it's a French ring dog. Just get it done, get it done." And I wouldn't even do that with my IPO dog. So I slowly built a dog, and he ended up being a really, really incredible, fantastic dog, and competed at relatively high level. 2 Mondial Ring World Championships. He recently died this year of cancer unexpectedly, but he was a really incredible dog, and I learned a lot from that dog. And one of the big things that I learned that I crossed over the training from ring into IPO was learning how to use a toy or a prey item as a reward using secondary obedience in the protection work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I never thought that was possible in IPO or Schutzhund anyway. I'm like, what do you mean I'm going to give the dog a ball for healing during the protection work? Well, after about 2 or 3 years of training my ring dog, I'm going, well, what the heck? You know, I can give my dog a ball in front of the decoy.
But I can't.
Yeah, the helper or the decoy and my Malinois in ring, and I can diffuse and make impulse control and show him that, listen, you could get rewarded from me or you could get rewarded from the decoy also, either way.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, wow, what a mind-blowing experience that is. Why can't I do that in IPO? The problem is with IPO or in Schutzhund training, you know, we talk about the dog has to work in a different drive state coming into the blind, into aggression,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
But I think it's still possible to be able to utilize a toy during secondary obedience in Schutzhund
Mm-hmm.
to help control the dog and use reward-based training instead of punishment-based training. So that was a big eye-opener. One of the other big eye-openers was in ring, you want to teach dogs when they're biting to counter in and
Mm-hmm.
push. And I was taught, you know, a lot for Schutzhund, the Belgian style of pulling, right? A lot of pulling and making conflict to teach the dog to pull and explode into the out. And I always thought I never want a dog to push in or counter. Well, when I got into ring, I'm like, well, I need the dog to push in and counter onto the decoy, especially in French ring, because he's never going to get a grip that's presented to him.
Yeah.
He's going to barely get maybe with 2 canines, you know, especially if the dog's being escaped in French ring, he may only get a canine grip. And at any given opportunity, the dog's got to push and counter in and try to disable the decoy. So those were just some small things that I learned. I mean, I could go on for another 3 hours about about stuff.
I really liked your secondary reinforcing with a toy for the secondary. I feel like that, you know, gets rid of a lot of the conflict you see. A lot of times you watch these old Schutzhund videos, and for the time, I mean, they didn't know any better, but you see the dog in major conflict because I'm sure there's heavy compulsion, and I like the reward with for the secondary obedience because I mean, like it's just getting rid of that conflict.
Yeah, and you know, and I would debate about this all day long. Cause I've got a good training friend of mine, Rob Dunn, who has a dog that shows all the aggression that you could ever ask for in the blind, in the guarding phase, and everything, but can also reward the dog with a ball for secondary obedience.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be done.
Yeah,
you know, it absolutely can be done. You know, and it's just a matter of teaching the dog it and teaching the dog impulse control, and that the ball is more than something I'm just going to give you, you chew on, and I take it right back from you.
Yeah. It seems like a lot of times there's some ego involved I don't want my dog ever to, in the presence of a helper, be worried about the ball. But yeah, I agree with your stance on it there.
You know, and the bottom line is, and I hate to go out on this limb and say this, it is a sport.
Yes.
Right? Like, you know, a lot of people say, well, I need my dog to be this, I need him to be real, and I need him to protect me. I know we don't want to damage the integrity of the breeding of the German Shepherd dog, but it is a sport, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I don't need a dog to protect me. Matter of fact, my job is to protect my sport dogs, you know, because they're kind of a high commodity. They're very valuable. I don't need them to protect me. And it is a sport. That being said, I read somewhere on the internet today that Gunther Diegel from the SV, who's a longtime judge and somebody that's very knowledgeable about the German Shepherd dog, came out today and said, we're not looking at Schutzhund or IPO as one of the major factors for our breeding program anymore of the German Shepherd dog, which was a very interesting comment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So you can look at that however you want to look at it. I'm not here to debate any of that. Yep. All I know is that I compete in a dog sport, and I do need points.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I kind of feel the same way about it. If you're going to make a breeding decision, I mean, you're going to want to see the dog outside of a trial picture anyway. So,
right.
So I mean, we're at this point. I feel like Schutz and IPO. You can almost separate the sport and the breed test as far as my opinion.
100%.
Yep.
And I'm not a breeder, so I'm not going to live and die about any words that I say about breeding. I tried it a couple times. I was horrible. I didn't get anything out of it. You know, I bred 2 really, really good dogs, and they produced 10 pieces of crap, and I said, you know what, I can't do this.
Yeah,
leave that to the professionals.
Yep.
But I on the other side of that is there's no way, you know, we can talk about, does the dog have aggression? Does he have prey drive? The bottom line is they have to have good temperament, and that's something we will all agree on, right? They can't be a spook. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, kind of in that vein, are you looking for different qualities in a dog for a Mondio ring dog versus an IPO dog? And what would those qualities be for each?
You know, personally, I am. I'm not going to speak for everybody. I mean, whatever I say is definitely not the Bible. There's people that have come before me that I look up to, and there's going to be people that come after me. But we know, as the rules state, in IPO or Schutzhund, we want to see a change of drives from the blind search or the search of helper coming into the blind for the guarding phase, correct?
Mm-hmm.
That's what it states in the rules. They want to see a switch of drives coming in for the guarding phase. What that means is, during the blind search, the dog is in a hunt drive, and he's working primarily in prey.
Yep.
As he rounds the corner into the blind, we're looking for the dog to work in more a state of aggression, or whatever, fight drive, whatever terminology that people want to call it or argue over in the bar or whatever. But they want to see a change of drive states.
Mm-hmm.
In ring, I really don't want to see any type of aggression or civil aggression in the dog. Okay. The reason being is it can get very personal between the decoy and the dog in ring.
Mm-hmm.
You know, especially during the escorts and the use of the stick, and be able to do it, having the liberties in French ring, not as much Mondio ring, but in French ring, the decoy has a lot of liberty with the dog. So it's better if the dog stays in a state of prey drive where he's not taking it personal. And it's just a fun, generally a fun boxing match or, mixed martial arts match with the helper. And the dog's like, yeah, I'm not taking any of it personal. I can still function happily. And I'm working in a drive state that I'm very, very comfortable in.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the dog switches into any type of drive state of aggression, he could take it personal, and then you're going to be dealing with a whole other slew of problems that come along with the dog working in that drive state.
Yep.
But that's just my take, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
The next guy may say something completely different. I'm humble enough to know that my word is not the Bible.
Yeah. So within those sports, is there anything you think that Schutzhund could benefit from Mondio Ring? Do you think there's anything that, say you were made Schutzhund dictator for the day, is there anything you would bring over from Mondio Ring to help improve the sport?
It's such a good question, and once again, I could talk about this for the next 5 hours. I happen to be finishing my Mondio Ring judging apprenticeship actually next month, so I'll be a licensed Mondio Ring judge.
Uh-huh.
I compete at a relatively high level in IPO and in French Ring also. So it's an interesting talk when you really get me into it. Man, there's so much that you can in Mondio Ring. Mondio translates into World Ring.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it means. And the way Mondio Ring came about was about 15 years ago. I don't know the exact time frame. May have been a little longer, 18 years ago. In Europe, a bunch of guys were sitting around a bar, I assume, having a couple drinks. And you had a couple IPO guys, you had a couple French ring guys, and you had a couple NVBK guys. And they said, hey, let's come up with a new sport that will incorporate kind of all three sports.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really how the sport was designed. Is there anything you can take from Mondio Ring into IPO? Absolutely. One thing is Mondio Ring is a theater. So when you go onto that field, you're dealing with tons of distractions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it could be a theater. There's a theme for every trial, whether it's Lord of the Rings, or this past weekend where I was doing an apprentice judging, it was birthday party, right? Mm-hmm. So the dog has to learn to work around all these distractions.
Okay.
I think that's one big thing, especially for the novice people getting into IPO or any type of competitive obedience, is teaching the dog to work in a trial environment. Well, what's a Schutzhund or IPO trial environment? Well, heck, I don't know. Generally, it's pretty sterile, but there's so many things that could be thrown at you, right?
Mm-hmm.
For instance, 2 weeks ago at our regional IPO championship, I had to down my dog on the send away while there was a train running past, the back of the field honking its horn.
Yep.
And you wouldn't believe how many dogs couldn't quite deal with that. So, just being able to teach the dog to deal with all the heavy distraction stuff is one thing. And once again, being able to use, prey items as reward during secondary obedience and that type of thing. And another interesting thing is, in IPO, a lot of people say, oh my God, obedience is 8 minutes. It's so long. You feel like you're so long out there.
Mm-hmm.
Mondio Ring Ring 3 or French Ring 3 is 45 minutes long in the ring.
Wow.
There's no collar. There's no nothing. We don't even have a collar on the dog. So you can imagine that. Like, how do I keep my dog together for 45 minutes? It's obedience, jumps, and then bite work. And he knows the bite work's coming. It's not like I take him off the field, put him in the car. He has some canine Vertex, and I bring him out. It's protection. So it's really interesting. I learned how to keep a dog together for 45 minutes. I'm like, God, 7 minutes to an obedience routine?
That should be
not so difficult.
Yeah, that should be a piece of cake. Yeah. So at Mondio, they don't have any. Is there a set routine, or is it? Does judge just tell you as you go?
No. In French ring, the competitors draw for the order of the exercises, and in Mondio ring, generally the judge will pick the order of the exercises. So it's never the same any trial. Like, one trial you could start with in obedience with healing. The next you could start with food refusal. The next trial you could start with a send out for the first exercise. The only thing that stays the same is it's always in Mondio ring obedience exercises, then your jumps, and then your bite work.
Okay.
Other than that, it's different every single time. So that's an interesting thing too, because in IPO or Schutzhund, we tend to pattern train, right?
Yep.
And I always tell the novice people, hey, when you're training what I call the back half of the routine in IPO for obedience, do your A-frame and your jump and your send-away retrieve, and do your send-away all in that order. But the reality is I could bring my ring dog out, heel out on the field, and do a send-away first, or I could do a send-away last.
Okay.
So I'm like, well, it's not that difficult if your dog really knows what the exercise is.
Yeah, no, that'd be cool to see, kind of breaking up the Schutzhund routine a little bit.
Right.
Now, in Mondio, you said it's 45 minutes. Do they demand the same kind of level of precision that IPO?
No, that's a big difference. In the ring sports, the exercises are what we call goal-oriented. This is the thing that I don't necessarily like in the ring that I'd like to see be changed is, let's say, in a retrieve. Did the dog do it or did he not do it? Mm-hmm. You're not going to be judged on speed of the dog. You will be judged on mouthing of a retrieve item, but you're not going to be judged so much on technical side. Same with healing, same with pretty much anything. so that was one thing. When I got into ring, I was like, well, I want my dog to heel beautifully. I want him to be happy. I want him to look a certain way, and a lot of the old-time ring people were saying, hey, Dave, you don't need that. You don't need that. You don't need that. Mm-hmm. And I said, but I may not need it, but it's a mental state for my dog.
No, absolutely.
Right? So if he's operating this way, I'm more likely to get him to work at the highest of his potential if he's happy and clear and knows what he's doing. But no, to answer your question, the exercises are completely goal-oriented. Did the dog do it within the parameters of the rules? And there's point deductions, right? Mm-hmm. But there's no judge's interpretation. Was he happy? Was he spirited? There's none of that.
Okay.
Which is interesting, because I would like to see that change sometime in the future. I doubt I'll be the person to make that change because I got enough to do, but
yeah.
It would be nice.
Okay. So with a dog, would you ever cross-train the same dog within multiple disciplines? I know you said earlier that you kind of have a different archetype of what kind of dog you would like for each sport. Would you ever cross-train? Would you put your Mondio ring and do a Schutzen trial and try to compete with the dog?
I do. I personally don't.
Mm-hmm.
And, back in the early 2000s, when the Malinois kind of became the cool thing and everybody started getting the Mondio ring, everybody was cross-training the dogs.
Mm-hmm.
The problem that I see with it, and it's maybe my personal problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can only do one thing and try to make it really good. Like, I've got to focus on one sport with that dog.
Yeah, that's a
like,
problem.
It's enough to get the dog tracking, doing obedience, and doing protection, IPO style at the dog's top potential. I'm not going to mix it up on him because I think, can you do it? Yes, absolutely. You can do it, but I don't think you can do it at the top level. Like, there's been people that have dogs that are IPO 3, French ring 3, and Mondio ring 3. Matter of fact, there's a friend of mine, Daniela up in the, I think, Connecticut area, a very good friend of mine, very good trainer too, who did it with one of her dogs. So, but that's like one person, right?
Yeah.
And I know everyone's like, well, yeah, it's good to cross-train them. I think you can do it, but if you're looking for the top level, I'm looking for a different type of dog for each sport. And, I look at it as a human, I can only do what there's not many sports figures that cross over from football and baseball, right?
Yeah.
That are like at the top of the game. There's a couple that do it. Deion Sanders did it, but we're talking about I can count them on one hand.
Yeah, I think you almost run the risk of the old saying, "Jack of all trades, master of none." Where
exactly
where
that's
you can,
exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah, where you can do them all at a lower level, but you're not going to excel.
And then we talk about, well, what's a low level? Look, you could do it at a club level and get very good scores, but when we start talking international level world championships, I'm telling you, I've been on 10 different world teams with different dogs in different disciplines. It takes every ounce of energy and focus I have to get that one dog focused on the one thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a personal goal. It's whatever you want to achieve with your dog, basically. Like you said, if you're going to go the international level, probably not the smartest thing to try to.
No,
like you
not
said,
with the same dog.
Yeah, like
not
you said, it
dog.
doesn't mean it can't be done, but probably not the smartest route to go.
Right.
Yep.
Now, I have done something, I think it was 2 years ago, where, and I may be the only one in the United States that has ever done it. I went to an FCI World Championship, IPO World Championship with a dog that I had named Idolo from the Eurosport breeding program. Mm-hmm. And then I flew home I did very well at that FCIs. I don't remember what place I was in, but he did very well. I flew home, and a week later, flew back to Europe with my Malinois for the Mondio Ring World Championship.
Man, what is that?
That
like
was a little bit of a mind-blowing experience, switching gears completely. You're in Europe for whatever, 15 days, focusing on IPO with your one dog, flying home, and literally 4 or 5 days later getting your Malinois ready to fly back over to France for the Mondio Ring World Championship.
Man, that would be rough. Just I've only competed in 2 national trials and just get my dog ready for that. I can't even imagine what it would take like to get 2 dogs ready for 2 international trials. I mean, that's an
just
impressive
the travel
feat,
and logistics alone, getting the paperwork ready for the dog, not to mention the training, and it's like, I remember when I was at the FCI World Championship, I was there for about 15 days, and we were like the last 2 days. And I think it was a Sunday, and everyone's like, "Hey, Dave, man, you just don't seem like you're in it." I'm like, "Listen, I'm already back home thinking about my Malinois, then I got to get on a plane in 4 days and get back over here."
Yeah, man. So, what is the biggest mistake you see beginners making in Schutzen IPO?
Man, that's a good question, because I just got done doing a blog on this. So, in the last 10, 8, 5 years, we've seen a change in the sport, right? Mm-hmm. Especially in obedience, where the rules are very different, where the dogs have to look a lot happier. We can't show signs of stress. They have to be very correct at the top level, right? Mm-hmm. So we get into all these very progressive training things, right? And yeah, believe me, I do it, right? I have a whole DVD series about how to train very, very progressively to get absolute correctness and keep the drive. But I think what the beginners are missing is they're focusing on all the correctness and all this stuff with the dogs in obedience, but they're forgetting about keeping the dog in a heightened drive state. Mm-hmm. And I've seen it from, everywhere I go. It's not only in the United States, it's in South America, even in Europe. They're getting so obsessed with correctness and stuff that they're realizing, hey, we're losing drive out of the dog. We're not showing the joy of the working of the dog and that whole thing. And I remember when I got into the sport, I train obedience very differently than I did 15 years ago. But, if you understand the progression of how obedience kind of came, especially in IPO from the 80s to the 90s to the 2000s, and then understanding the one thing that can't change is the dog has to be in a heightened state of drive for a lot of different reasons, not only for points and for the aesthetic the aesthetic view of what the judge sees with the dog, but also for the dog to deal with any stress or pressure. And we're bringing up a word that we could debate, all day long about is, should the dog be able to handle pressure? Well, the reality is there's pressure or there's stress the minute you ask a dog to do something, whether it's with you're using reward-based training or any type of punishment training, right? So if the dog's working in a higher state of drive, he's definitely going to be able to deal with a lot of these stressors more. But the biggest thing that I see the novice people doing is not working these drives in a higher state of drive. That's the number one thing that I see right now.
Mm-hmm. So do you kind of put an emphasis on drive building?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, that's a big thing. I could make a DVD, or I could tell you about how to make sit, stand, down, heel, boost, whatever. But if your dog's not doing it in drive, then we're missing a huge piece of it. And I always tell beginners that, hey, if I'm a judge, and I'm not an IPO judge yet, I may be in the near future, but I'm not yet. But if I was a judge, I would be happy to see your dog working in a nice drive state and a little incorrect over flat and correct. And I'm sure you would agree with that too, right?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, I that's my number one thing is I want my dogs to have a nice attitude. So I can definitely appreciate
I'm willing to overlook a little incorrectness if the dog's attitude and working in a nice drive state.
Yep.
But if the dog's flat but correct, well, then we're looking at 1975 AKC obedience, right?
Yep. Yeah. If you could change one thing about Schutzen, what would it be?
Oh, man, I really love the sport. The sport, I always feel like I'm coming home to the sport. I love ring, and I love Mondial ring and French ring. I call it my dirty little secret. But IPO really is where I feel most at home. You put me in a stadium and an IPO field, and I feel really at home. There's not a heck of a lot that I would change. I tend to work dogs a little bit differently and a little bit more progressively. I don't always chase quote aggression if a dog doesn't offer me that.
Mm-hmm.
So I would, and I would like maybe that there's not such an emphasis in the protection phase of the dog needs to be in that state of aggression, especially in the guarding, because a dog I think can work okay, in a state of prey drive, maybe not get the highest points as a different dog, but can do very well. I've had dogs that do very well in those drive states. Yeah, there's not a whole heck of a lot that I would change right now. I think that the sport's going in a very positive way.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I feel like I'm coming home when we talk about IPO.
Okay.
That's why I feel the best, or it's where I feel the most relaxed and at home.
Cool. So what do you feel like you do better than anybody else?
I cook really good. I can make a damn good margarita and vodka tonic.
There we go. That's important.
On a serious note, if we're talking about from a training standpoint, I have a really solid grip and knowledge on canine learning theory. That's one of the biggest things that I can say that I have. I even have week-long courses for that in my dog training school where we just talk about learning theory. So I have a very good understanding of that. And I always tell people, if you have a very good understanding of learning theory with an animal, you will never have another question in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
If I understand how a dog's mind works, well, then I can figure out systematically how to change a behavior or make a behavior. The other thing is I know the rules of all the sports really, really well, and that's one thing that I would preach to all the beginners and the novice people. Really understand the rules. If you understand the rules, that'll make you a confident handler. And then, coming from being a musician for 15 years, I feel like I'm relatively innovative and experimental and artistic, and I think that has a big role in my dog training. I think I'm very experimental.
Yeah.
Whether it's good or bad. Very innovative, whether it's good or bad.
Yeah,
And,
do you use
not being afraid to take chances with what I'm doing,
Yeah.
Good or bad. I make mistakes every single day, but I also come up with some really cool shit.
Yeah.
Every day.
Yeah, and I was going to touch on that earlier. Do you feel like your music kind of gave you some good improv skills when it comes to your training? And
Absolutely. I have an associate's degree in jazz performance, right? So I really understand improvisational skills and that type of thing, and being experimental. That's something that always fueled me as in my career as a musician, right? Mm-hmm. And I carried that right over into my dog training career. I had back in the day, in the early '90s, I had an instructor when I was studying at the Wisconsin Conservatory of Music, an old jazz drummer. His name was Carl Allen, and he always used to talk to me and say, "Dave, the way I think of playing the drums is that I'm a cook in the kitchen, and I'm making some gumbo, and I'm mixing that, I'm trying that, I'm throwing a little bit of that in, and I'm never afraid to try something, right?"
Yep.
And that's the way that I view dog training.
Cool. I like that.
There's rules and laws of theory that I stay within,
mm-hmm.
but I definitely push the parameters, and I experiment, and I say, well, that worked or that didn't work, and if you don't take chances, you're going to be stuck and you're going to hit a wall.
Yeah, something I kind of struggle with personally is, how do you know when something's not working? How do you know when to cut bait?
It's funny. Can I tell people, hey, if you see something cool that I put on Facebook, normally I came up with it the night before after I've had a few drinks.
Yeah.
But then I test it in the morning when I'm sober and go, well, geez, that was just a bunch of crap last night. That didn't work. Or it did actually work. And then I'm telling my wife, get the camera really quick. We need to get a shot of this. But no, realistically, whenever I'm trying something, usually when I'm experimenting, it's very reward-based.
Uh-huh.
And I tend to not get in a lot of trouble if I'm doing reward-based training. if I'm going to use any type of corrections or punishment type of training, it's very thought out.
Yep.
And I'm going to think about the consequences about when I do something, realizing that a behavior may break down, but do I have enough experience to get it back?
Uh-huh.
So there, you know, that's one of those things. How do I know something I'm doing is not working? I don't give up on an idea really easily. I really don't.
Yeah.
I say if it's not working, there's a breakdown in the communication with me and the dog, and that's my fault. And I say, how can I communicate to the dog better?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of how I am.
Yeah.
I'll find
But
something.
I mean, I give it a few days, and you know, I let the dog, you know, think about it. I let it marinate in the dog's head, and then I bring it back out. And if it's just not working, you know, I give it always a couple days. I always give it 50 to 100 trials, which is a lot to a lot of people. You know, most people go, I did it 5 times and it didn't work. You know?
Yeah.
I go, okay, did I give it 50 to 100 trials? Is the dog not figuring out? Well, if there's a breakdown in the communication, or can I change it to make it easier for the dog to learn? You know, is there a way I can accelerate the learning and maybe even break my own rule, you know?
Mm-hmm. No, and it sounds like you said in the beginning, you're doing a lot of it from your reward base, so you're keeping that important attitude, that attitude that means so much to you.
Right.
It sounds like even though you're trying new things, you're not crushing that attitude, essentially.
No.
Yeah.
You know, my basic, when I'm training a dog, all behaviors are taught through reward-based training. Mm-hmm. All of them. Yeah. And I can get them pretty far down the line. You know, I did an IPO 1 with a young dog last year. I think I got 96 obedience. It was just a club trial, but I don't really recall giving that dog any correction, period. You know, he never wore a pinch collar.
Yep.
He never wore an electric collar. The dog made 96 points in obedience virtually with reward-based training.
Okay, so we're going to get into the time-traveling machine and go back to when you first started. What would you tell yourself? If you could tell yourself one thing, what would it be and why?
I did not look at dog training the way I look at it today. You know, and this goes back to what we were talking about, me being a musician in the past and being, quote, an artist. I would have said, hey, approach dog training as an art form and being, you know, don't be afraid to give artistic feeling to it. You're the painter, right? You paint whatever colors you want to paint. Could I have approached it back in the day as being very black and white, especially the first year or two, and I would say, hey man, there's so many possibilities. Do not stay closed-minded during this whole journey, you know, and really study and research everything. If you're into IPO, don't only look at IPO trainers. Look at agility trainers. Look at AKC obedience trainer, look at hunting trainers, look at detection dog trainers, because it's all the same thing. We're training dogs, right? Mm-hmm. That's all it is. That'd probably be the main thing. And also, don't be afraid to take chances. That's one of the biggest things. You know, think of it as a laboratory every day. I always tell young people, listen, you're going to mess up a couple dogs. It's going to happen. Let's mess them up and get it done with, right?
Yeah.
So we can move on.
Well, cool, man. I love your approach to training, man, and I thank you for doing the podcast. Is there anything that you would like to promote?
You know, I just wanted to comment about my DVDs. You know, they're entitled. I have some on nose work. I have some on foundation obedience training. You can purchase them through caninetrainingsystems.com. Learning to Learn and Training Through Pictures by Dave Kroyer. But the thing I want to talk about them, especially if you look at my obedience videos, is the way that I start a dog in obedience. It's not IPO, it's not ring, it's not AKC obedience. Really what I'm doing is I'm putting in these tools for the dog to be able to learn, and it's very multidimensional. It could go any way you want it to go. It's not specifically geared towards one thing. And that's the thing that I really want, the point I want to punch home is that training, you know, we want to gear it towards something, but don't make it one-dimensional so much. There's so much to be learned from the other disciplines. You heck, I do dock diving now, like we got a dock diving pool, and my wife was really into it, and I just saw it as a really cool thing to cool off in the summertime and have a beer and throw a toy in for my melon walk. But I really got into it, and I learned, matter of fact, I taught my send away for ring through dock diving.
Oh, wow.
Which is really crazy, because I kept teaching them to mark the thing off the vertical rig, and then one day I taught him to, I just told him mark downfield, and he ran down there and got it. But my point being is that training is multidimensional. Don't get locked into one way, one thing, and really explore and study all the possibilities of all the different disciplines, venues, and people out there. Because the reality is, whether it's ring or IPO, those are really small blips in the dog training world. There's a whole nother world of dog training stuff out there, and learning about those only make you, a more well-rounded trainer.
Well, cool, man. Well, like I said, thank you for doing the podcast, man. I think they'll get a good feel for your training through this interview. So thanks a lot, man.
Absolutely. Hope to see everybody out on the field 2015.
All right. Thanks, Dave. So that was our interview with Dave Kroyer. I think there was some really good information in there, guys. I hope there's some stuff you can take to help out your own training. To reiterate some of the things Dave said, you can find his DVDs at caninetrainingsystems.com. His series is titled Training Through Pictures. It's an award-winning series, excellent DVDs, guys. Go out there, get those DVDs. The two in the series are Learning to Learn, which was the ones he was talking about where it's not specifically towards any specific discipline. It's just showing a good foundational obedience that can take you anywhere. And his other one is Nose Work 1, The Indication. So get out there, get those DVDs. He's also got a website, davekroyer.com, where you can go to check out his seminar schedules and book a seminar through him. So go out there, check that out as well. And last but not least, I need some help from you guys. I need you to rate and review us on iTunes. This will help both this podcast, and it'll help people discover the sport of Schutzhund. I think will come up in searches and stuff easier if you guys, the more ratings and reviews we get. So if you could help me out, get on there, rate and review. Higher reviews are preferred, so keep that in mind. But thanks for listening to another episode of High and Trial Podcast. We'll be out again here in 2 weeks with another great interview. So talk to you then.
Good and gone. Heading where the warm winds blow. I'm good and gone. Heading where the warm winds blow. The ground is getting colder. Less light in the day. Something said I gotta leave this place. Running down know.